On today's Locked On Thunder podcast, the Oklahoma City Thunder saw J-Dub and Shai participate in the NBA All-Star Game. And what are some dream NBA playoff matchups that could unfold during the second half of the season?
You are Locked On Thunder, your daily Oklahoma City Thunder podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Let's get it going on the Locked On Thunder podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day. I am your host, media member and beat writer for Thunder on SI, Rylan Stiles. Follow me on Twitter at Rylan_Stiles. Follow the show on Twitter at LOThunderPod. Email the show, LOThunderPod@gmail.com. On today's show, we're diving into the Oklahoma City Thunder, bringing out two All-Stars on Sunday night for a little basketball and a ton of quote-unquote entertainment with Michael Martin at Michael on Sports. And Let's Talk Thunder on YouTube. Michael, what concert should we perform here before we get into the podcast?
We got to have somebody who hasn't been relevant in a while. I don't know. Let's get Jesse McCartney, somebody just in between, somebody very early 2000s.
Yeah, this was a complete mess. I mean, what was so funny about NBA All-Star Sunday night is that the basketball product, what little you actually got on Sunday, was the best all-star product that the league's had in a long time, but you had to sit through so much. I don't know what non-basketball sicko made it to the end.
Yeah, I mean, if we didn't have to watch it, I don't think we would have gotten through the whole thing, and it's one of those things where it was so bad, and I do wonder if we'll look back, like I said, that the NBA should just release a hard-cut edit without the ads, without the musical performances. I think it'd do well. I wonder if the basketball was actually that much better, or if it was just everything else just sucks so bad that it sort of like raised the tides of the boats of like making the game look better.
And maybe that was their 3D underwater chess move, was let's make everything else just awful, including Kevin Hart. That way the basketball, by comparison, which you only got for 20 minutes of a 3-hour window, looked incredible. But SGA had an incredible first game. We had 12 points, 2 rebounds, 1 assist, 1 block in the 41-32 win over J-Dub, who only had 2 points, 1 assist, 1 block, and 1 steal. Feel bad for J-Dub. I mean, his first ever All-Star, he only plays 7 minutes total at the NBA All-Star game. That part of all of this really, really sucks for All-Stars. Like Pascal Siakam only had 3 minutes in the second game. Shai had 6 minutes in the second game. It was really not a ton of action. In the second game, Shai and his team Chuckster lost 41-25, and they got off to a brutal start, 11-1, in favor of the OGs from Shaq. And Shai had 4 points, 1 rebound. He also debuted his first ever signature shoe. Thoughts on the shoe and thoughts on his overall game from Shai?
I'll start with the shoe first. I like it. I'm a big shoe guy, sneaker guy. I'm looking forward to playing in it. I think that's going to be really interesting. Traction looks nice. I like the materials, the layers. Obviously, Shai's a guy who puts a lot of thought into it. I think that before we can really give our like official thoughts, I need to see a few more colorways and not just a solid one. But overall, good start, and definitely you can see where the work was put in. And he's definitely not one of those guys with creative director and sort of a title of just making a creative title. Like, he's actually putting some work into this. So interesting, cool for Shai. And then as for the actual All-Star game, yeah, a few cool moments here and there. I don't feel like we got as many or really any mano-a-mano moments between Shai and Dub, but you know, whatever. Very happy for those guys. It is unfortunate that Kevin Hart got more time on the court than J-Dub. I mean, that guy, Jaren, the guy who shot from like half court with Dame, the white guy with a mullet, probably got more court time than Dub, unfortunately. But you know, step in the right direction, and I think these guys, like, obviously they want to play a lot more, but for Dub, in particular, I think it was just a big deal just to be sort of included.
Yeah, I thought it was a step in the right direction. I thought that, again, I'd like to see them run it back with this format, only not have as much programming. And I get it. It's tough of like, you can't have these guys play back to back to back, but if it was a real game, they'd only get 1 break anyway. And I would say like the one that was a bridge too far was the whole TNT retirement ceremony. Even though they're not retiring, they're going to be back next year just for a different outlet. But like, if you didn't have that weird stoppage in between the championship game, like on that timeout, it wouldn't have been as bad. It still would have been bad, but not just dreadful. And it did breed a ton of competition. I don't know what the format should be. I do think that whatever they do next year, they should keep it segregated into teams of like, the international guys versus the Americans or whatever, because that holds, I think, more pride for these guys than just their conference. And like we would love to see it go back to the East versus West. Clearly that doesn't work, but I mean, you saw the Rising Stars even put up a huge fight trying to be the scrappy underdog story. You saw the youngsters like Jaren Jackson Jr. wanting to compete, wanting to go out there and lock down defense. It didn't work a ton, but he did try. And then, like, that effort level, I think, was there because they were so split up into these different groups. Whether it's the same format next year or international, because the Rising Stars used to be, it used to be international and then American players going toe-to-toe, world versus USA. Whether it's that or something else, they need to find a way to make the who you're playing for deeper than just East versus West, I think.
Yeah, I'm glad. At first, I was sort of hesitant with the way they picked these teams of like, oh, they're sort of rigging it, but it was the right thing to do because it makes sense. Like, you have LeBron who didn't play, but like Steph, Durant, all those guys, the older guard who are saying that we're not going to let the young guys beat us. You have the international guys who want to prove that they're the best basketball players in the world. They're better than the Americans. And you have the young guys wanting to establish themselves, and the Rising Stars want to show that they're going to be future all-stars, whatnot. It makes a lot of sense, and maybe you go with those same teams, maybe you vary it up a little bit, but to your point, it's very, very natural competition, motivation for those guys. In the future, I would like to see the score get a little bit raised, but at the same time, you saw it in the last game of like how rough it can be when a team's not scoring. So you kind of like the lower score. I don't know what the correct target score is, or maybe you go by time and do an Elam ending in the second half. I think there is something there for these guys to get better with, but maybe it's something like the dunk contest where it needs to just go away for a little bit. You do one-on-one tournaments or whatnot, but All-Star Weekend, if they want the players to take it seriously, then the NBA has to sort of take it seriously and not as just this big sort of media event, parade, and things like that. And you mentioned the inside the NBA guys with TNT. We all love them. We want to see them get a proper send-off, but like, aren't they going to get the Western Conference Finals? Like, just let them do it there. Why was it at this thing? Like, I get that all the NBA eyes are on it, but by that point, I think a lot of people tuned out. And you're doing it at like the halftime of the third game of the night that wasn't even a real game.
Yeah, it was just an odd timing for it. And it is just odd timing of like, we're doing all this boohooing for the Inside the NBA crew, who is going to have a show next year. Like they're gonna be the exact same. And in fact, Turner is the one still producing it. It'll be the exact same show. It'll just be on a different channel, which in the modern era, who cares what channel it's on? Like it's all just a button away for these guys. But it was overall, I will say, I thought it was better than in years past. There's just, interestingly enough, I think more tweaks off the floor than on it. And in years past, it's been all about the on-the-floor product.
Yeah, I mean, they've been talking about Adam Silver trying to rally the troops and get all the guys to play hard, and they finally did it. And then it was the NBA that actually fumbled the bag with how they sort of operated with these things, where there's just so much showmanship and so many things like that. And I get that they want to have high price tickets and make money in the arenas, but like they priced out all the real fans who are going to be really excited. It felt like it was more of just a social event for a lot of these tech guys in San Francisco. And then you talk about like the musical guests and things like that. That's all cool if you want to do that at like halftime or whatever, but it just seemed like there was never ever a rhythm that could be found because it was like shoehorning jokes in. I don't know. It felt like the brain rot era where I was almost surprised. I was talking to a friend about it. Like, they're going to put Subway Surfers like on TikTok, like on the big screen to hold everybody's attention. Like, they were so worried about losing attention that they constantly had these little things like the Mr. Beast thing or whatever. And all we really wanted to do was watch basketball. It's really simple. And for whatever reason, they're trying to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah. And to your point, that's a really good point about the crowd, which did suck. And it didn't come across TV, but that wasn't anything to do with the market that they picked or like, oh, there's so many things to do in San Francisco. Put this in a basketball city. It had everything to do with the basketball fans in San Francisco and the surrounding areas could not afford to go to the event. Like you made it to where you just kept the tech bros and the corporate sponsors and everything in that atmosphere. And there was no atmosphere because of it, where it's like, I think that's not a good representation because we see what happens whenever you get the Bay Area fans like in the arenas, whenever Oracle was historically the toughest place to play, and even the Chase Center whenever they went on their run, like was a hard place to play, still is a hard place to play, but it wasn't basketball fans there. So, of course, the crowd atmosphere suffered a bit. And then they brought out Mr. Beast. And I mean, they tried everything in the book to make this fun. And the thing is, the most fun part of it was the true basketball, unlike in years past. But coming up, the deadline's over. These rosters are pretty much set. Who is going to threaten the Oklahoma City Thunder out west? And what are some dream playoff matchups that the NBA should be eyeing? But first, I want to say right now, my good friends over at Hungry Root, go check them out today, because when it comes to grocery shopping and meal planning, it's really hard to keep up with the pace of your busy life between work and family obligations and your schedule. And so if you want to eat healthier, you want to get in the grocery store but don't know where to start and can't find the time to do it, it just stresses you out, go check out Hungry Root, because with everything changing, Hungry Root is there for you. It's a game changer. It's the easiest way to eat healthy without all the stress. With Hungry Root, it's like having a personal shopper and a nutritionist all in one place. They take care of grocery shopping. They recommend meals and groceries based upon the tastes and goals that you have. And it has high protein, gluten-free options as well. And the best part is every meal is ready in 15 minutes or less. Plus, they bring you the groceries from Hungry Root. So talking about quickly turning meals around, Hungry Root is there for you. It's delivered straight to your door with healthy options from Hungry Root. You're going to love Hungry Root as much as everyone does. For a limited time only, you get 40% off your first box and a free item in every box for life, just by going to hungryroot.com/LockedInNBA and use the promo code LockedInNBA. That's hungryroot.com/LockedInNBA, or use the promo code LockedInNBA to get 40% off your first box and a free item of your choice for life. hungryroot.com/LockedInNBA, code LockedOnNBA. Do not miss out at hungryroot.com/LockedOnNBA. We're back on the Locked On Thunder podcast, on the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day. I'm Rylan Stiles, host of Locked On Thunder. Joining us today is Michael Martin. Let's talk Thunder on YouTube. Michael, the trade deadline's over. We saw the biggest trade in NBA history and everything in between, including some teams not make a move at all, including Oklahoma City stayed pat, but they did get Chet back. You saw Memphis just do some salary shredding. You saw Houston not go get that go-to score that we all think that they're missing. So with the dust settling, and even Denver stayed put, with the dust settling, let's rank our top 10 threats to Oklahoma City, who's the number 1 seed overall by 8 games at the All-Star break. Let's do this from number 1 to number 10. Who is your biggest threat to Oklahoma City as it stands right now?
Maybe it's just the boogeyman in the closet, but I still have the Mavericks to a degree, because I still think they bring a lot of the same similar problems in a matchup with this Thunder team. Obviously, they're not going to have the same level of firepower offensively that they had with Luka Doncic, but Anthony Davis is a matchup problem in his own right, and defensively, they're just going to go up an entirely new level that they haven't really been able to go. I mean, Derek Lively is going to look even better defensively, so I think that would be the number 1 team for me, but I can see arguments for other teams, but maybe it's a psychological thing with this team. It's a variety of stuff, but I think that they would still be, for the emotions, psychological aspects, and sort of just how these teams guard each other, would be the toughest one for me.
Yeah, so I totally see that point. And the Mavericks are higher up on my list than they are in the NBA standings. It's just such brutal luck for them this year to date. I mean, they did create bad luck by trading away Luka Doncic, but even after that trade, if they were fully healthy and you knew that they were going to have Lively back, and you knew they were going to have AD back, and you knew they were going to have Gafford back, they would still be the toughest test for the Thunder, I think. But whenever AD, his injury status is in question, you have Gafford now out for 6 weeks, still have Lively on the shelf. This is going to be a tough task for Kyrie Irving to pull off. Now, he can pull it off. He's that good. But he's also dealing with injuries and playing through injuries in his own right. And the reason they got pushed out of the 1 spot for me is because there's too many variables. And we saw even last year, like heading into the play-in tournament last year, the Pelicans had Zion playing really good basketball, and he gets hurt in the play-in tournament, and it goes from what would have been, I still think, a Thunder win in round 1 over the Pelicans to a sweep. And it's like they only had 1 game where you felt like the Thunder could lose whenever they had the shot from CJ at the buzzer. But like it was a really uncompetitive 4-game sweep, all things considered. I think if Zion would have played, it would have been a little bit different. The Thunder still would have won the series, but a much tougher task. It's the same thing with Dallas. It's like not only can they navigate this rest of the season post All-Star break, and for the the rest of this pod, we're going to call it the second half of the year, even though for you math nerds, it's not truly the next 41 games. But for the second half of the season, like they have to navigate injury issues just to make the play-in, and then hopefully they're healthy at the play-in, and hopefully in the play-in they don't suffer an injury en route. So there's so many variables that I can't put them number one personally, but I totally see the philosophy behind, hey, if this is a fully healthy Mavs team that is an 8 seed who otherwise wouldn't have been an 8 seed, it's an overseeded 8 seed, if you will, I'm totally with you. It's just that those variables push them down. And for me, number one is the Denver Nuggets, because the Nuggets, yes, they lack true, bottom half of the roster depth. Not very important when it comes to the playoffs, not very important at all. And throughout NBA history, typically the best player in the world is able to win you some series and is able to drag you further than you should be, at least a round or two further than you should be. And they have the best player in the world. I mean, we can discuss the MVP stuff every week from now on. We won't do it this pod, but they have the best player in the world flat out. And they have the parts around him. I don't know how we've gotten to a point where we're discounting Michael Porter Jr., Aaron Gordon, Jamal Murray, who just dropped 50. Like, those are really high-level role players. Those are massive guys to put around Jokic, and they've done it. They have the experience. They've won championships together, and I just think that they're the biggest threat to the Thunder, and I imagine they're still pretty high on your list.
Yeah, I had him number 2, number 1, just sort of splitting hairs, coin flip here, but all the reasons you mentioned, Jokic is the best player in the world. He can win you 2 or 3 games by himself. He's playing incredibly well right now. And then the other point is Michael Porter Jr., Jamal Murray are really hitting their stride, looking more like the guys we've seen them in the past, like sort of that playout, that finals run they had a few years ago. So if they are like those types of players, then they're incredibly dangerous. Aaron Gordon's an incredibly versatile player who I really like. I still think that they're going to have matchup problems guarding Shai, but you talk about a team with home court advantage, like I think the elevation thing is no joke, and I think that's something that could really, really factor into a playoff series. And you talk about a young Thunder team that doesn't have as many playoff scars as a lot of their competition. Denver has all of them and more, and they have like a lot of hunger for kind of getting back into this because a lot of people think that their title run was a fluke. They've got some extra motivation with a guy like Russell Westbrook on their roster, so I think that would be an incredibly interesting series, and I also have it number 2.
So then my number 3 team is Dallas, and so we talked about Dallas, so I'll let you have the floor for number 3.
Yeah, number 3, I had the Lakers. Maybe it's once again just the boogeyman of not really seeing them yet, but I think that they wouldn't really have a great chance of guarding the Thunder in like transition opportunities, and I think that there would be some different matchups of not really being able to guard Shai between playing Luka, LeBron, and Austin Reeves for that many minutes. But you talk about the supercomputer minds and the NBA playoffs where it really, really turns into a half-court possession game of just your turn, my turn, of just dueling back and forth. Those are the two or three best guys in the entire world, and if you can put 48 minutes of those guys on the floor with just above-average role players, I think they're super, super dangerous. I'd still pick the Thunder to beat them in a series, but those guys specifically, I'm just always going to have a hard time counting out.
So I do have Denver and Dallas 1 and 3. I did skip over my second team, which is LA. It's the Lakers version of LA because they're number 2 for all the reasons that you've said with Luka, LeBron. I mean, come on. Like, I think the Thunder are uniquely positioned to slow down the Lakers as much as you possibly can. But even so, they're going to be a just juggernaut offensively, and you've got to keep pace as the Thunder with still gambling on role players who I think are better than they were a year ago, who I think that will shoot better than they did a year ago, but they haven't proven it yet. So you're still banking on that. Where I think that the Thunder would have the advantage against LA is LA's center rotation, because while I do respect Dorian Finney-Smith, and I do respect Vando, and I do respect Gabe, I think that they have really good Shai perimeter defenders, as they proved last year. Last year, though, all that length and size was a detriment to Shai because you were funneling him in from that to AD. Jackson Hayes, not exactly the same defensive threat. It's where I think that you've neutered yourself a little bit when it comes to getting past Oklahoma City without a center trade, which obviously they tried to make the Mark Williams thing. It didn't work out for them. But still, because of their offensive firepower, it's number 2. So for me, Nuggets, Lakers, Mavericks is my top 3. Number 4, I think, is interesting. I don't want to see if we have the same number 4. Because like the top 3, pretty cut and dry for us. But number 4.
I put the Warriors. It's another one of those sort of psychological matchups. I would have had the Warriors at the very bottom before this Jimmy Butler trade, but I think he makes things extremely interesting, and we've seen this Thunder team not exactly thrive in sort of these mud fight games, and you play against Draymond Green and Jimmy Butler and a team as experienced as the Warriors, now adding another more experienced guy like Jimmy Butler, I think that it's going to be extremely hard to knock a team like that out. And so I would still pick the Thunder to win that one, but we've seen some weird things like the Warriors. They've been two of the Thunder's losses this year, I'm pretty sure, and just a weird, difficult matchup, and just a team that has all the psychological advantage in terms of like playoff scars and things like that.
So I totally agree with the Warriors being a massive threat. They're in my top 5. They are number 5 because you're banking on the Jimmy Butler effect and the Draymond Green effect, two guys who I think really can. For one, Jimmy Butler's an all-time playoff riser, frankly. No matter what you think about him off the court, or what you think about him as a personality, he's an all-time playoff riser.
I'm so sorry. I was trying to unmute myself.
No matter what you think about Jimmy Butler as a personality, like he is incredible come playoff time. We know that stuff can get hot at a moment's notice, regardless of how great and historic your defense is. And then Draymond, he can get under your skin, clearly, in the postseason. Plus, you do have the cross-country flight. It's a very raucous environment. So I have them number 5. My number 4 team is the Minnesota Timberwolves. And it's interesting because it would fully depend on what you believe Chris Finch will do in the playoffs. If you can promise me Chris Finch is willing to play Randall off the floor, and you promise me that he's willing to give you a heavy dose of Naz Reid as a lone big out there, then that's why I have the Wolves so high. Now, if he goes against all this and he doesn't prepare for this individual matchup and just plays his top guys because, hey, they're our top guys, we're paying them, we got to play them, that they're our respected reputation, rotation, then you've lost me. But if I think that Finch, much like Mark, would throw that stuff out and just game plan for the matchup in front of him. And the Minnesota Timberwolves are a unique matchup for the Thunder and can make the Thunder a jump shooting team. And that's the big question about the Thunder right now. It's like, perhaps it could backfire on Minnesota and that like Wiggins and Kaysen and Caruso and all these guys can take turns getting hot. Sure. But if they don't, and if that's still a red flag for Oklahoma City, that outside shooting, and they're packing the paint with one of the best rim protectors we've ever seen, man, it could get dicey for Oklahoma City. So I have them in my top 5. I have them at number 4 with Golden State at 5. So we've covered my top 5. Who's in your 5?
I have the Memphis Grizzlies. I'll probably touch on the Wolves later. I didn't have them in my top 5. The Grizzlies, I just like their depth. I like their experience. And I think they're a more stable team and reliable team than the Wolves. I think the Wolves are pretty volatile. And the Grizzlies, like, if they get some good Ja Morant games, which I don't think would happen against the Thunder, they can be pretty dangerous. I think Jaren Jackson Jr. is a really unique matchup for this Thunder team in terms of, like, he can go guard the perimeter on some of these threes for Chet and guys like that, but also protect the rim. He's a floor spacer in his own right, so he can take Chet or Hartenstein away from the rim. But in the end, like, we saw them the Thunder just blow them out without Chet the other day, and I think it would come down once again to sort of the depth of the other players, but guys like Desmond Bane are still really, really playing well. I think it's less about I think the Grizzlies are really, really great. It's more just looking at the rest of the field, and I have a lot more skepticism around them.
So we've done our top 5. The second half of this top 10 list coming up after this. But first, I want to say right now, our good friends over at FanDuel. Go check out FanDuel today because when the game tips off, the NBA action is only getting started. There's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout NBA games. So even if you missed opening tip and you want to still bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action at FanDuel. If you're looking for bigger payouts, you can combine live bets in the same game parlay feature. FanDuel is so fun. It makes watching these games so much more entertaining right now. FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets on your first $5 bet just by visiting FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for a shot at $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Make every moment more at FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. And when you look at NBA lines, already some out there for Wednesday's clash with Charlotte coming to town in LA to take on the Lakers. 13.5-point favorites the Lakers are over Charlotte. So you can go check that out at FanDuel.com. We're back on the Lockdown Thunder podcast on the Lockdown Podcast Network, your teams every day. Joining us today is Michael Martin at Michael on Sports. Let's Talk Thunder on YouTube. Michael, we've done our top 5. My number 6 is who you just touched on, the Memphis Grizzlies. What pushes them down for me is how Jaren Jackson Jr. is playing, but not getting the co-star from Ja Morant. Like if in the second half of this year, Ja Morant turns back into his reputation, then they skyrocket. But as of this moment, I still have the number 6, but you've already laid out the case for Memphis. So who's your number 6?
I have the Houston Rockets, and it's another one of those things where we've just seen this Thunder team play weird against that Rockets team. I think their toughness really can be problematic for the Thunder team. I think that the Thunder offensively would just be really able to outdo them. I think that it would be just a rock fight defensively between these two teams. But, Şengün's going to have all types of problems defensively guarding pretty much anyone the Thunder put out on the floor, but guys like Amen Thompson, I think I'm really high on him from what I've seen this year. I think he would do a decent job guarding Shai, Dylan Brooks. I think his physicality could bother Dub a little bit. Jalen Green doesn't really scare me, but it's another one of those things where I have 3 teams sort of in the same group of they have something where the Thunder just play weird against them, and that's the Mavericks, the Warriors, and this Rockets team.
So this is our biggest disagreement to date, and it probably will be our biggest disagreement. We've only been one spot off for the rest of this list, but I have the Rockets at number 9 out of 10 because I think that the plan for the Rockets is let's make this a rock fight. It's just a defensive slugfest, and their defense is awesome. It's not historic the way Oklahoma City's is, and so Oklahoma City is even / better. I think that they're better than Houston in the defensive category. And in those slow-paced games where the Rockets can't get out in transition and you're not seeing Thompson run the floor as much in the slowed-down version of the playoffs, only the Thunder have a go-to scorer to win you games, and I think that would be the difference maker. Not that they'd sweep the Thunder, the Rockets wouldn't be swept by the Thunder, but they're also not going to get that Fred VanVleet 38-point night every single night, and they'll get it a couple times. That'll be cool for Houston, but I really can't see the Thunder losing this series overall to Houston. I'd have to really paint the worst possible picture for the Thunder to lose that series, and that's why I've pushed them further down. And my number 7 team, which might be our flip-flop disagreement, the Suns. The Suns. Listen, if we're scrapping the barrel at the bottom of the West at this point, but if the Suns got in there and depth doesn't matter and these guys are willing to just play 42-plus minutes, and it's just here's Booker, here's Durant, deal with it, and I love the Nick Richards pickup. It's just deal with it. I don't know. It could be an interesting series more so to me than even Houston because I think Houston has the better roster. I think they're the better units. They're more elite defense, and I don't know that Phoenix is really elite at anything right now. And I think that they're a more well-constructed team. I think that Houston has a better future than the Suns. But in terms of matchups, I really struggle to see how the Rockets can pull out these games. Whereas the Suns, would it shock you if Booker and Durant just play nuclear for 4 of the 7 games? Even for as good as the Thunder perimeter defense is, it wouldn't just stun me the way it would if the Rockets won 4.
Yeah, by no means am I saying I think that the Rockets would win that series. My only other defense of them is Ime Udoka as a playoff coach. I really, really respect. I think he would throw a lot of monkey wrenches at this Thunder team. And I don't think they would beat them offensively like you mentioned. I think the Thunder would still win that series, but it would be one of those things where you come out with a lot of scars that make you weaker going into the next matchup. But we definitely flip-flop because I have the Suns all the way down at 10. I just don't really trust the Suns team. You mentioned that those guys can go off, but their defense is just Swiss cheese. And I feel I don't know how they're going to stop Shai from averaging 30 points a game unless they just hard double him all night. And even then, then you get into the blender with Dub going downhill and all these shooters, and Chet's going to have a really nice matchup against this team. Hartenstein's going to be the biggest player on the floor. I mean, I can't remember the last time, maybe going back to Steven Adams, that the Thunder have the biggest bruising rebounder on the floor. Nick Richards is a solid player, but in the playoffs, I just don't really trust him. And then you have some other guys, Grayson Allen's solid, Ryan Dunn's solid, but Bradley Beal, he's not guarding anybody. And we've seen what Lou Dort does to Devin Booker, and it's not good, although Kevin Durant hasn't played. But I think that Dort would just be in his jersey for as many games the series went, and it would just really come down to, can Durant look basically what he looked like in Brooklyn when he almost beat the Bucks single-handedly, and I don't think that's happening.
So we've gotten through the top 7. At 8, I have the Clippers, and this says more about the rest of the West that we have to list off versus the Clippers. It's the Clippers bet is just if they're healthy, and the if they're healthy has been a thing for half a decade, and they haven't been healthy. So it is what it is. But if you get a fully healthy Clippers team, it'd be a lot of fun. It'd be a lot of fun series, and that's more than I can say for like the Kings and even the Spurs if they sneak in there. So I have the Kings at number 8. We've already discussed my number 19 with the Rockets. So give us your 7, 8, 9 as a refresher for the last 2 spots.
7, 8, 9. I have the Wolves at 7. I just think that the turnovers are going to fly for that team. And you mentioned if Chris Finch, I think it just comes down to if the ownership and the GM back him, then maybe he'll do it. I mean, Gobert, you have quite a few more years on that deal. Julius Randle is going to be expiring pretty soon, so it doesn't really matter if you make him mad. And then as I have the Clippers at 8 as well. I think all the same reasons as you had. Ty Lue's a coach I really, really respect. I think he's going to be awesome in any potential playoff matchup. He's going to throw some wrenches at you. James Harden, not a known playoff performer. Kawhi, if he's healthy, knock on wood, that's just never really happened. Maybe it will this time, but they have a lot of shooters, and they're very, very good defensively. But if their shooters can get hot on the right night, guys like Norman Powell and others, I think that they can definitely give you a little bit of a scare. But yeah, will they be healthy? We've been doing this for almost a decade with them. And then the last team that we haven't talked about is the Sacramento Kings. And the only reason I have them as a threat higher than the Suns is I just think that they are a more volatile three-point shooting team of just all the guys like Zach LaVine, Malik Monk, Keegan Murray. You can go down the line. I think that they could be a team that really rains a lot of threes, but overall defensively, they just don't have enough for this Thunder team to really stop them at all, even at the point of attack, on the wings, at the center position, like sort of just across the board, the Thunder have the advantage. But I'd say that's the only argument, but I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are.
Yeah, so my last 2 teams, not surprisingly, are the Spurs and the Kings. I have the Spurs at 10 ahead of the Kings because I just think that the Spurs could shave off more games just purely based upon like Victor's Victor. And in a playoff setting with the lights on him, I think he rises to the occasion, just trying to predict how he would handle it all. And if he wins you a game and then you have like some De'Aaron Fox explosion alongside a good Wemby game, alongside a pesky Chris Paul game, they win you 2 games, and that's more than I think that Sacramento even has a prayer of doing against this Thunder team. I just do not respect Sacramento at all. And as we're going to talk about the dream playoff matchups, I think, though, the benefit for the Thunder and why I think that Shai can be the face of the league is because in this playoff run, holy cow, like we don't think the Thunder will lose to many of these teams, but they all have very interesting storylines except the Kings. Like the Kings are the only matchup that could get Shai put on NBA TV. Every other matchup, all 7 games are on TNT or ESPN or ABC, like some mass, and they're massively marketed to where, and if he has a deep playoff run and wins MVP, like then the tide can really turn on Shai's Q rating. But the Kings would just be an uninspiring game. I think that they would get swept, similarly to the Pelicans series last year, where it's like they have a fun game maybe in game 1, and then it's just downhill from there the rest of the series. So that's kind of how low I am on the Kings on this list.
Yeah, I think we're just at this point just splitting hairs because I think the Suns and the Kings have around the same chance. I mean, the Suns have a better chance of winning 1 or 2 games, I guess, than the Kings, but neither team's beating the Thunder in a playoff series. But you mentioned storylines. It's going to be really, really interesting, and that is a solid point. That's the only one that would get them put just cast away on NBA TV.
Yeah, that'd be the worst case scenario in terms of like marketing, which brings us to our dream matchups. Now, I want to just react to your dream matchups because this was your brainchild that we had whenever we were at a Thunder game talking about ideas. So I want to just react to your dream matchups, and then whenever it gets closer, like we'll draft actual matchups. Once the play-in tournament is like more solidified, we'll kind of do a podcast of like, okay, the best and worst case scenario in this play-in tournament, winner when the Thunder have that week off, of like best case for TV ratings, best case for winning, and then worst case for both those things. But before we do that, I did ask you to rank these teams, and I asked you to do a footnote of how far you think the series would go. So just to kind of break it up into tiers, how many, if any, of these teams do you have taking the Thunder to 7 games?
6 or 7. 7 games, I only have the Nuggets and the Mavs. That's it. I think those are the only real arguments. The other ones, it's either 6 or below.
And then is there a clear break of like this many teams can take them to 6 versus 5 and less?
Yeah, so 5 to 6, the tier I have is the Lakers, Warriors, Grizzlies, and the Wolves I'll put in there. I think the Rockets, you've talked me out of it a little bit, but I think those teams would put up a more competitive fight than the last tier, which would probably be a sweep or a gentleman's sweep, but overall the Thunder still get the win.
Now, hit me with your dream playoff matchups. This is for if Adam Silver really could rig this league to get the biggest storylines, the brightest lights, and the most entertaining matchups, who would they be?
Are these all Thunder involved, or just go for it here?
You just go for it. You let it rip.
Well, obviously it's the Lakers, the Mavericks is the number one. I mean, that has to be it. Of the Lakers sending them home, you have all the Luka coming home factor. You have Anthony Davis, whether he plays or not. You have all these injuries. You have Kyrie versus LeBron. You have all these different elements. You have Jason Kidd's going to have to talk about the series. Nico Harrison, if they get eliminated in exit interviews, is going to have to talk about it. That's going to be super interesting. I think that the Warriors and the Lakers, just you have Steph versus LeBron one last time, the last dance of those two would be super interesting. And then, Anthony Edwards and Shai, Minnesota versus the Thunder, I think would be really, really intriguing to see. Just two guys who could be the face of the league squaring off, and what could be a rivalry for the long extended period of both their primes. And then I've got a few other ones here. I mean, the Mavericks and the Thunder is obvious. I think everybody knew that one. You have the Thunder going to try to go beat the big bad Wolves of that team that just knocked them out last year. It's not exactly the same team, but still, I think that sets. And then another one that I think would be super, super interesting is the Thunder versus the Clippers storyline-wise, because you have the Shai trade, and you're just looking at what the Clippers are now. You have the James Harden trade going all the way back with the Thunder. I think that would be super, super cool. And then I guess the last one that I'll hit on here, I got two more, was the Warriors of once again just beating like the ghost of your past. Of it would be a very, very fitting ending of that Warriors team kind of they did cause the demise of the Durant Westbrook team, and for them to come full circle where now the Thunder have rebuilt under this new regime under Mark and Shai and Dub and all these guys to then close the chapter on the Steph Warriors, I think would be really poetic. And the last one would just be the Grizzlies, because we've seen, or not the Grizzlies, I'll go with the Nuggets, because you have the Thunder going and beating the Giant, beating the best player in the world, and really establishing themselves. And maybe that's one of those series like where Shai can establish himself as the best in the world because you beat the literal guy. But any of those stand out to you? Sort of off the cuff here, but I'm very passionate. I think this would be a lot of fun to sort of just go through.
Yeah, well, what stood out to me was your Freudian slip of like Memphis first over Denver, and I'm saying that as in it illustrates what we just talked about of only the Kings would suck, because Memphis, the Thunder, that'd be awesome. It'd be like a rematch of the grit and grind era, but now these two teams have a different level of rivalry where it's like Memphis feels like the Thunder stole their quote unquote gimmick, and it's like the Memphis used to be the team that everybody's beating their breath about of like, oh, wait till this team gets older, wait till this team gets more mature, and now all eyes are on the Thunder, and now they go toe to toe in a 7-game series. Like that would be really awesome. Even one that we didn't touch on, which is like Victor Chet in a playoff series. For as much as those guys give the right PR answer of like, oh, it's just the Thunder versus Spurs. Sure. We watch you guys play though. Like the tape doesn't lie. You guys go at each other pretty good in between the whistles. So like it would be salivating material for Adam Silver if they got the 1-8 Thunder Spurs. And it's just you rat-a-tat-tat through the list. Every single possible matchup has these storylines and this drama and this history behind it that we would be clinging to. We will be clinging to every step of the way. So I just thought that your idea was a really good one to put into perspective. Like, it's not just hyperbole, or like it's not just homerism to be like every matchup that's possibly out there would be insanely fun.
I mean, we didn't even touch on the Rockets of just sort of their converging timelines of both teams post Chris Paul, Russell Westbrook trade emerging. And there's been all these comparisons. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when people with the Rockets and their fans were talking about KPJ being a better player than Shai. I remember all that. I remember the Şengün trade with the Thunder. There's a lot of things going on, and the Grizzlies and the Rockets to me just feel like the anti-Thunder of like the opposite side in the mirror, like the evil version of you. And it would be really interesting to see those teams sort of match up, because the Thunder, they play this brand of basketball, really sharing the ball. The Rockets for a while was not very pass happy. It was a lot of ball dominant, a lot of hero ball with your guy Jalen Green. And to sort of see those guys go back and forth, I think would be super, super interesting. And like you said, bring it back to some of the old days. I mean, you remember when the Rockets played the Thunder multiple times in the first round, whether it was James Harden in his first playoff series back against the Thunder, or it was MVP Russ versus James Harden that year.
Yeah, and in the bubble, which was my first ever Locked On crossover with Jackson Gatlin, previewing that series. So they've come full circle even for this show, which puts a bow on this show. Michael, it's been a ton of fun to do these Michael Martin Mondays with you throughout the year so far. Looking forward to many more of them. What have you got cooking up for the people as they crave basketball content at Let's Talk Thunder?
Yes, sir. So Monday morning around 9, 10, 11 a.m., I'll have my new video dropping about J-Dub being the do-it all-star, as being one of the more well-rounded players in the entire NBA that I'm really excited for people to see. And then the upload after that, I'm weighing my options between doing something more where I just tear down the all-star game once again, or if I do something about Aaron Wiggins, sort of the hot streak he's been on recently.
Stay tuned for that. Go subscribe to Let's Talk Thunder on YouTube for that. Michael, thanks again, and until next time, be good and be good to one another.